Most people think growing up in the 1980s was just about fun. Bright colors, loud music, freedom. But that's not what made it different. What actually set the 80s apart is that your brain learned its rules before the world became unstable. And if you grew up during that window, there's a good chance you felt quietly out of sync ever since. Not broken, not nostalgic, just operating on a different internal rhythm. And once you see why, a lot of things about yourself start to make sense. Here, what most people miss. The 1980s weren't chaotic, and they weren't hyper-controlled. They were a psychological in-between. Old systems were still standing, but constant threat hadn't arrived yet. So your nervous system developed without learning to scan for danger first. That matters more than people realize, because confidence didn't form as performance. It formed as expectation. You weren't taught to fear the future. You were taught to move toward it. Try, push, see what happens. Psychology calls this baseline optimism. Not blind hope, but the assumption that effort is worth making. That's why modern anxiety culture can feel strange to you. Your brain doesn't default to protect. It defaults to attempt. And that difference runs deep. Another quiet trait formed without anyone naming it. Autonomy. Many people from the 80s spent long stretches unsupervised. Not neglected. Not unsafe. Just trusted. You came home. You figured things out. You handled boredom on your own. And boredom wasn't a flaw. Boredom forces decision-making. No one scheduled your growth. No one optimized your childhood. So your brain learned something early. I decide what happens next. Psychologists call this an internal locus of control. It's why many people from this generation don't wait for permission. They don't need constant feedback. They can operate alone without feeling lost. But here's the part people don't talk about. That same autonomy can make modern environments feel suffocating. Too many rules. Too many notifications. Too much explanation for everything. Your nervous system wasn't trained for constant input. It was trained for space. Let me pause here for a moment. Because if any of this feels personal, you're not imagining it. You're noticing a real mismatch between how you were wired and how the world now operates. And there's one trait that explains this tension more than anything else. Reward. In the 80s, wanting something meant waiting, saving, planning, anticipating. The reward didn't arrive instantly. And that delay did something important. Research on dopamine regulation showed that delayed rewards build stronger satisfaction pathways. Your brain learned that effort gives meaning, that the process matters, which is why instant access today can feel hollow. Not because you're rigid, not because you're old-fashioned, but because your nervous system was trained for the chase, not just the click. And when effort disappears, meaning often goes with it. There's also a form of confidence people rarely name. Physical confidence. You navigated the world without backup. No GPS. No instant answers. No safety net tracking your location. You got lost. You figured it out. You crossed limits and learned where they were. Psychologists call this embodied confidence. Not bravado. Not recklessness. A quiet belief that says, I'll figure it out if I have to. That belief doesn't fade with age. It becomes part of how you move through life. But the rarest trait of all, presence. You grew up before everything became content. Moments weren't documented. They were lived. Your attention wasn't split between experience and performance. And that trained something powerful. the ability to stay here. This is why silence doesn't scare you, why waiting doesn't agitate you, why constant stimulation feels exhausting. Your brain learned continuity, not interruption. So when the modern world feels loud, it's not because it's wrong. It's because it's operating at a speed your nervous system was never trained for. Here's the part most people never hear. When people from the 80s say, "I feel like I'm from another planet," what they're really noticing is this. They were shaped in a time when childhood was physical, when effort preceded reward, when attention wasn't constantly divided. Those conditions built strength that are now misunderstood. Self-reliance that looks like stubbornness. Calm that looks like detachment. Independence that looks like resistance. But none of that is dysfunction. It's adaptation. If you grew up in the 1980s, you're not outdated. You're carrying a nervous system trained for a different pace of life. One where presence mattered, effort mattered, and the future still felt like something you could move toward, not just manage. Understanding that isn't about going backward. It's about realizing why the present feels the way